It was supposed to be a normal evening at the Grand Music Hall, rich velvet seats, crystal chandeliers, and a crowd that had come to see one man, Vincent Marlowe. Known as a world-class pianist with a flair for drama and an ego to match, Vincent thrived on attention. His fingers danced over piano keys like lightning, and his fans worshipped every note. That night, he made a bold announcement. "I welcome anyone brave enough to challenge me," he said, flashing a smug smile to the room. Laughter echoed. No one ever took him seriously, until she stood up. From the back of the hall, a woman in simple clothes, unnoticed until now, stepped forward. Her name was Clara. No one knew her, and she didn't seem to belong in a place filled with tuxedos and gowns. But there was something in her eyes, calm, certain, almost haunting. The room fell silent. Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You play?" he asked with a smirk. She nodded once. Without saying a word, Clara walked to the second piano, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. What followed changed everything. The audience leaned in. Vincent expected a few clumsy notes, maybe a basic tune. Instead, the moment she touched the piano, something shifted. Her music was soft at first, delicate, almost like a whisper. Then it grew, full of emotion, complexity, and something even Vincent couldn't name. His smile slowly faded. People weren't just listening. They were feeling something they couldn't explain. And as Clara played on, Vincent realized this wasn't just a challenge, it was a reckoning. But what happened next left the entire hall breathless, and Vincent forever changed. Keep watching, because what she did in the final moments turned a simple duel into a legend. Clara's hands moved with a kind of grace that only comes from a place deeper than practice. Something lived, something felt. The room, once buzzing with chatter and whispers, was now frozen. Even the chandeliers above seemed to listen. Vincent sat motionless, unsure whether he was watching a miracle or a threat. His fingers twitched, aching to respond, but he couldn't look away. This woman, this stranger, was playing with the soul of someone who had nothing to prove, and yet everything to say. People began whispering her name, though none of them truly knew her. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "How does she play like that?" whispered another. Vincent's longtime fans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The confidence they had in their champion, once unshakable, was now uncertain. This wasn't just impressive, it was personal, emotional, honest. Clara's music was telling a story without a single word, and every note carried a quiet defiance that spoke directly to Vincent's pride. He remembered her now. Years ago, in a small-town recital, there'd been a girl who played barefoot, eyes closed, lost in her own sound. Unnatural. But she disappeared after that, and no one ever heard of her again, until now. Clara finished her first piece, then calmly looked over at Vincent. Her face was unreadable. No smugness, no challenge, just silence. The crowd didn't cheer, afraid to break the spell. Vincent stood slowly, clearing his throat. His reputation was on the line, his ego too. He stepped toward his piano. The room waited. But something in his expression had changed. He wasn't just preparing to play. He was preparing to fight. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Clara hadn't even started showing what she was truly capable of. Vincent took his seat at the grand piano, shoulders stiff, eyes locked on the keys. The applause that usually followed his performances was missing, replaced by a heavy silence. He cracked his knuckles and began to play. His fingers moved with practiced perfection, every note clean and sharp, but something was off. The music had no weight, no heart. It was brilliant, but empty. People noticed. Whispers filled the hall again, but this time they weren't in his favor. Some shifted their attention back to Clara, still seated, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't reacting to his music at all. No awe, no fear, just calm focus, like she was waiting for something, or someone. What no one else knew was that this wasn't just a piano duel. It was a history catching up with them both. Years ago, Clara's family had owned a small music school tucked away in a quiet town. Vincent had passed through, unknown at the time, seeking guidance. It was Clara's mother who taught him his first lessons in expression, not just skill. But when fame called, he left that part of his life behind and never looked back. Clara hadn't forgotten. Backstage, the event organizer whispered frantically to his assistant. "Who cleared her to play?" he asked. "She's not on the list." But no one had an answer. It was as if she'd just appeared, walking into the spotlight like she was meant to be there all along. In the audience sat a quiet old man, a former concert pianist who hadn't touched the keys in decades. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed, watching Clara, not with confusion but recognition. He'd seen this kind of playing before, long ago, and it always meant one thing. A reckoning was coming, but whose it would be was still unknown. Vincent's second piece was faster, louder, desperate. His fingers flew, but every note felt like it was chasing something just out of reach. The crowd watched, unsure whether they were witnessing a performance or a man trying not to lose himself. Sweat gathered at his temple, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not with Clara still sitting so still, as if she hadn't even begun. Across the room, Clara's eyes never left him. She wasn't judging, she was remembering. Not just the old lessons or the past he'd abandoned, but what that past had cost. Vincent hadn't only walked away from the small-town school, had taken credit for techniques and touches passed down through her family. And now that music was being returned to him, in full. The tension in the hall was unbearable. People held their breath between each note. A music critic near the front scratched through his notes, unsure how to explain what he was hearing. It wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a story unraveling right in front of them, with every key press adding weight to a mystery no one could quite name. Backstage, the assistant found Clara's name in an old envelope, an invitation sent years ago, never responded to. But somehow, she had arrived tonight, almost like she knew this moment would come. Vincent slammed the final chord and stood. Applause broke out, scattered and unsure. He didn't bow. Instead, he turned to Clara. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low but trembling. "Your turn." Clara rose slowly and stepped toward the piano. But this time, she didn't sit right away. She turned to the audience, letting her fingers hover just above the keys. Everyone leaned in. Even Vincent, now silent, waited. And then she played the first note. It wasn't loud. But it changed everything. That first note echoed longer than it should have. Something about it lingered, like it wasn't just sound, but memory. Clara's hands moved slowly at first, almost uncertain. But within seconds, the music began to build, and with it, so did the room's tension. It wasn't just the beauty of her playing. It was the feeling that each note held something Vincent hadn't expected. Pieces of his asterisk music. But different, rearranged, warmer, deeper. He froze. She was playing a variation of one of his most celebrated compositions, but not the version the world knew. This one had layers only he could recognize. Secrets only Clara's family could have known. It hit him like a punch, because he hadn't written it alone. Years ago, during his early lessons with Clara's mother, they had co-created melodies in private sessions, fragments of which he later used in his rise to fame. He told himself he had earned it. Now, hearing Clara bring those same pieces back, complete, powerful, and more honest than he had ever dared to make them, was like being exposed. Gasps filled the hall as the piece unfolded. The audience didn't know the backstory, but they felt the weight of it. Even the lighting seemed to dim slightly, as if the music itself was shifting the mood. Then came the second twist. The old man in the crowd, long forgotten, sitting near the edge, stood up and walked slowly to the side of the stage. A few heads turned. Clara saw him and hesitated for the first time. Her eyes widened slightly. Vincent noticed it too. The man nodded at her, a quiet sign of approval, or maybe permission. Vincent stared at him. It was Harold Baines, the former maestro, Clara's grandfather, and the man who once refused to train Vincent. And now he was here, watching Clara finish what he never allowed Vincent to begin. Clara's fingers kept moving, but now with purpose sharpened by memory. The presence of her grandfather, Harold Baines, seemed to unlock something in her playing. The melody shifted again, now unmistakably a blend of both her legacy and Vincent's borrowed genius. The two styles clashed and danced, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension. Every note struck now wasn't just music, it was confrontation. A reckoning of stories stolen, lessons forgotten, and truths buried under fame. Vincent stood frozen, eyes locked on the keys she played as if watching his own reflection crack. He had spent years building a name on brilliance, but here it was laid bare. Clara's performance was more than a challenge, it was a mirror. The pieces he claimed, the sound he thought he owned, it all had roots, and she was the root. As Clara reached the final section, something unexpected happened. She slowed down. Her fingers hovered above the last chord, holding it back. Then she looked at Vincent, not with spite, not with pride, but with something else. Grace. And instead of finishing the piece, she stood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The duel wasn't over, but she had walked away from it. Vincent took a step forward, confused. "Why didn't you finish?" he asked, voice low, uncertain. Clara looked at him. "Because it's yours to finish," she said softly. But now, truthfully. That silence held more weight than applause ever could. Vincent looked at the piano, then at Harold, who gave a slow nod. For the first time in his life, Vincent sat at the keys without pride, without armor, just a man, facing what he'd once run from. He played, not perfectly, not powerfully, but honestly. And as the final note rang out, Clara turned to leave. Only Harold followed her, not with words, but with a quiet smile. Because what no one expected was this. The duel had never been about who played better. It had always been about who finally played real asterisk. The hall stayed quiet long after the music faded, not because it was over, but because everyone felt something had shifted. What started as a piano duel had turned into something no one expected, a lesson in humility, truth, and legacy. Clara didn't stay for applause. She slipped out through a side door with Harold, leaving behind only the echo of her unfinished piece and the memory of something bigger than competition. Back on stage, Vincent sat alone, the spotlight dimming around him. But he wasn't the same man who had welcomed the crowd with arrogance. He looked out over the audience, not as fans, but as witnesses. Witnesses to his fall, and maybe the beginning of something new. In the following days, clips of the performance spread across social media. Elitist pianist humbled by mysterious woman, the headlines read. But what people kept talking about wasn't just the duel, it was the feeling, the honesty in Clara's music. The moment she chose not to win, but to show something deeper, that's what stuck. The critics praised her raw emotion. Musicians online began analyzing the way she fused classical tradition with personal storytelling. And as for Vincent, he disappeared from the public eye for a while, not out of shame, but reflection. A month later, in a quiet video uploaded with no fanfare, he played Clara's unfinished piece. He didn't try to perfect it. He just let it breathe. And in that small, quiet performance, he finally honored where it all began. Sometimes, the greatest music doesn't come from who plays fastest or loudest. It comes from who dares to be real. And in the end, that was Clara's true victory. Not to defeat him, but to change him.